accountability organizations and good government groups have spotlighted delayed reporting and deference to police narratives in the OIG's reports on the NYPD's gang database and police recording of public protests. As chair of the committee with oversight over DOI, I look forward to an honest conversation with Commissioner Strauber about her understanding of these issues, the current state of relationship between PD and the IG, and I assume I'm a big supporter of Jessica Tisch, and I assume it has improved dramatically. I noticed today she let the press come back to one police plaza. That's a good thing. And the continued independence of the OIG. This hearing will also focus on the IG's public reports. As part of the conclusion of an investigation, the IG issues non-binding recommendations to PD. Although the PD does not need to accept these recommendations, the rejection of a recommendation is worthy of further discussion. Why did it happen? From examining PD overtime and the increased risk of negative policing to scrutinizing the NYPD's Strategic Response Group, the SRG, criminal group database, and surveillance and investigative practices directed at political organizations, I'm interested in discussing the most essential recommendations that the IG's office has issued that are yet to be implemented by the police department. We will discuss the PD's reasoning in rejecting these recommendations and whether DOI believes these responses warrant a rejection of their recommendations. I would like to note that the O&I committee will join the Committee on Public Safety and Technology to examine the police department's implementation of the Post Act, including the DOI's most recent Post-Act report in a separate hearing on February 19th. The Committee on Oversight Investigations, my committee, has oversight over the city's investigatory agency. Our independence and honesty are essential to ensuring good governance, and I think that's what the public wants. Today, more than ever, they want it. The committee will also hear two bills that I am proud to sponsor. Introduction 1020 would require the Commissioner of Investigation replace the Inspector General for the NYPD within 90 days after an Inspector General resigns or is removed. The output and influence of this important office depends on having a permanent head at the helm, and we don't want to accept a years-long delay in the appointment of an IG. The 90-day requirement already exists for DOI's IG for the Department of Correction. This bill would also require DOI to report on the number of investigations the IG conducts, the subject of each investigation, and a description of each incident where the police department did not give timely access to information. This data would help the council assess the scope and scale of the OIG NYPD's critical work, and it is critical work. Finally, Resolution 560, which is kind of like an intro, would direct DOI to conduct an investigation to ascertain the knowledge possessed by mayoral administrations on environmental toxins produced by the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and to submit a report to the council thereon. This legislation is a direct response to the Adams administration's refusal to release the documents despite requests from members of Congress, advocates, and the media, and other mayors have refused also, I want to be clear. Using a novel approach, and this is novel, if passed, this resolution would represent the first time, the very first time the City Council as a body has invoked the authority granted by Section 803 of the New York City Charter to direct DOI to conduct an investigation through a binding resolution. DOI would be required to complete a comprehensive public report on the findings no later than 2 years after the adoption of the resolution. As I think we know, more people have died in the years since the attack than died on the day itself from respiratory issues, cancers, and other diseases caused by the toxins on Ground Zero and the surrounding areas. This resolution would finally reveal what city government knew about environmental toxins produced by the September 11th attacks and when. And I hope California is paying attention to this. This transparency is particularly relevant in this moment when trust in government is severely lacking. The findings would also inform our city's response to future toxic emergencies. Before I conclude, I want to thank the following council staff for their work on this hearing. You'll see to my right committee staff, Nicole Kata, who's the attorney, Erica Cohen, an attorney, Alex Yablon and Owen Kotowski. From the O&I division staff, Meg Powers, Zachary Mayer Casales, Kevin Frick, and Nuzar Katir. And from my staff, Sam Goldsmith, and everyone working in the background to make this hearing run smoothly. And we also have been joined by Julie Wan on Zoom. Now, I want to turn it over to committee counsel to administer the oath.
Thank you, Chair Brewer. We will now hear testimony from the administration. We will hear from Commissioner Jocelyn Strauber and IG Janine Barrett. Before we begin, I will administer the affirmation. Panelists, please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Yes. I do.
Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Brewer and members of the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. My name is Jocelyn Strauber, and I have the privilege of serving as the Commissioner of the Department of Investigation. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about DOI's Office of the Inspector General for the New York City Police Department, OIG NYPD as we refer to it, and to provide you with an update on that unit's work. As you know, DOI oversees the operations, policies, programs, and practices of the New York City Police Department through DOI's Office of the Inspector General for the NYPD. Today, I will give an overview of the work of that office since I last testified in April 2022 on this issue, including an update on our access to records, facilities, and staff, improvements to our internal workflow, the status of our staffing, and also highlight some of the major reports we have issued over the past 2 years. OIG NYPD's in-depth investigations, public reports, and comprehensive recommendations seek to ensure that the department's practices and policies are sound and effective, and to provide public transparency with respect to those policies and practices. Our work thus contributes to effective policing and seeks to thereby strengthen the relationship between the department and the community. We have continued to pursue that work, issuing 4 reports in 2024 and preparing a 5th that was just issued yesterday, despite a significant decrease in staffing in the OIG NYPD, a challenge facing all of DOI's units and most city agencies. The unit currently has 9 members, a nearly 44% decrease from the 16 members in 2023. I note that in 2023, the unit also produced 4 reports, so our productivity has remained consistent despite those staffing challenges. Today, I will discuss some of the efforts I have made to amplify the unit's current staffing so that it can continue to complete investigations and issue reports, a critical responsibility that Inspector General Barrett and I are determined to meet despite our reduced numbers. These efforts include devoting substantial senior executive staff time, as well as other supervisory DOI staff, to assist in the unit's substantive work, and refocusing the team on its mandate to conduct systemic investigations of NYPD's policies, procedures, and practices. I will also provide you with our perspective on 2 pieces of legislation sponsored by Chair Brewer that are part of today's hearing, one that includes mandates relating to OIG NYPD, and another directing DOI to conduct a historical investigation regarding environmental toxins produced in the wake of the September 11th attacks. OIG NYPD was created in 2024 in accordance with Local Law 70, which directed the DOI Commissioner to appoint an Inspector General to investigate, review, study, audit, and make recommendations relating to the operations, policies, programs, and practices of NYPD. This mandate is the core of OIG NYPD's work, and since my tenure in early 2022, OIG NYPD has and will continue to focus primarily on examinations of the department's operations, policies, procedures, and practices. To the extent there are potential criminal matters involving individual NYPD personnel, those generally are handled by other DOI squads. Like other DOI squads, OIG NYPD's policy and procedure investigations may be based on complaint trends, media reports, community concerns, and information provided by advocacy groups, among other sources. Most of the individual complaints OIG NYPD receives do not result in investigations because they fall outside the office's mandate and are therefore generally referred to other agencies. For example, complaints relating to an individual's interaction with a police officer or officers would typically be referred to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, the CCRB, although, as I noted, we retain information about all complaints received in order to assess complaint trends, which could lead us to open a systemic investigation. Overall, the percentage of complaints to OIG NYPD that resulted in investigations are roughly consistent with DOI's overall figures. Since its inception, over 10 years ago, OIG NYPD has issued 35 reports and 263 recommendations, with 9 reports issued since the beginning of calendar year 2023, with 61 related recommendations. It is my responsibility as DOI Commissioner to ensure that OIG NYPD effectively carries out its mandate. In 2022, I shared concerns with this committee about issues facing the office, specifically its diminished staff, challenges accessing NYPD records, facilities, and staff, and the need to develop an effective streamlined process to produce comprehensive reports. I am pleased to update you today on these issues. Starting first with the question of access. OIG NYPD cannot do its job without meaningful and timely access to NYPD records, data, facilities, and staff. And early in my tenure, as you noted earlier, Chair Brewer, there were challenges in this area. But for over 2 years now, communication between our office and NYPD, as well as production of information and records, have markedly improved. The office continues to have bi-weekly meetings with NYPD to discuss any outstanding requests. NYPD recently has further streamlined its process to respond to our requests by assigning each one to an attorney who is responsible for promptly identifying and locating responsive information within the department and jump-starting internal discussions to obtain that information. The office has also implemented an escalation process to ensure that delays in production are promptly raised to senior levels at both DOI and NYPD. On the rare occasion where we cannot obtain relevant records, we document those instances in our public reports. For example, in our December 2024 report on the department's use of drones, we noted that we could not conduct a complete assessment of NYPD's compliance with the policies governing drone operations because we did not receive complete records concerning all drone deployments. However, this one issue did not prevent us from issuing a comprehensive report concerning various other aspects of the drone program with 6 findings and 10 recommendations. With respect to our staff, OIG NYPD has experienced significant attrition over the past year. As a result, it currently has a staff of 9, including the Inspector General. To bolster the unit's capacity, I have taken several significant steps, tapping senior DOI staff to support OIG NYPD's work in key ways that allow the office to focus on its critical and meet its critical mandate to examine systemic policy and procedure issues within the department. To that end, as I mentioned earlier, I have assigned investigations involving individual NYPD personnel or potential criminal matters to other Inspector General units within DOI that can better serve as leads on these types of investigations and collaborate with OIG NYPD where necessary. And on occasion, if appropriate, other squads also can conduct investigations involving NYPD policy and procedure, such as our Local Law 6 report that was issued last March, or the recent follow-up report on the department's policies and practices governing security details for elected officials. Report writing is a central function of OIG NYPD. It is a time-consuming process and a critical one to create a public record of the office's findings and the recommendations it has issued. To assist in this effort, as I mentioned, I have assigned senior DOI staff to help in the report writing process, freeing the office to focus on investigative work. These efforts have provided essential support to the team and led to results. As we said, OIG NYPD issued 4 reports in 2023 and 4 in 2024, and yesterday, the first report of 2025. Each of these reports include important recommendations that seek to strengthen NYPD policies and to bring public transparency to the department's practices. To give a few examples, over the past 2 years, the team has tackled critical topics and issued reports including the department's social media use policy, finding deficiencies in NYPD's policies, non-compliance with the citywide social media policy, and a lack of oversight of NYPD senior executives' social media posts. We issued a report on the department's community response team, which has expanded significantly in the past 2 years, finding an absence of written policies and procedures to guide the unit's actions and providing critical information to the public about an NYPD unit, information that had not been previously publicly available. We issued a report on the department's criminal group database, examining a number of issues, including the department's processes to add, remove, and maintain individuals in the database, and public concerns about inclusion in the database, providing the basis for an important follow-up report that we are currently working on to assess the department's compliance with our recommendations, a substantial number of which were accepted. We issued a report on the relationship between department overtime and negative policing outcomes, finding, not surprisingly, that overtime has a statistically significant relationship with a number of negative outcomes, and those would include things like lawsuits, CCRB complaints, and the like. This last report, involving overtime, is among the several mandated reports that legislation requires the office to produce. Some of those reports are annual reports. For example, each year, the office is required to assess the department's compliance with the Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology Act, known as the POST Act, and also to produce an annual comprehensive review that discusses all of the office's reports since the inception of the unit in 2014 and the current status of each recommendation. The March 2024 annual report discussed 20 investigative reports, 1 statement of findings, and the status of 233 recommendations issued over the office's 10 years. Each report involves a rigorous and thorough process, first obtaining key facts, including policies, procedures, and where appropriate, relevant data, interviewing witnesses, summarizing the background, and making key findings and conclusions that support our recommendations. We are making progress, but we want to do more so that we can weigh in more proactively on the issues of greatest impact to our community in a timely fashion. This is a challenge given that thorough investigations take time and resources, but it is a goal we are striving already to meet. As a follow-up to our report on the community response teams, we will be conducting an examination of critical issues relating to CRT, including the disciplinary history of its officers, the impact of CRT's work on the communities they police through an examination of available data. And as I just mentioned, the office is also working on a follow-up report to the criminal group database that will be issued in the first half of this year, focused on NYPD's review processes for the activation of individuals, the adding of individuals into the database, as well as the implementation of certain recommendations that the department accepted. OIG NYPD also has established valuable working relationships with the city's other police oversight agencies, including the CCRB, the Internal Affairs Bureau, and the Office of the Community Liaison associated with the Federal Monitor. Over the past 2 years, OIG NYPD has met regularly with the Office of the Liaison and, as necessary, with the Monitor. We have participated with the CCRB in 2 community forums hosted by the Community Liaison and focused on police accountability in Brooklyn and the Bronx, an effort that is ongoing and provides a way for us to educate the public about police accountability and to connect with community members so they know whom to contact when they do have a complaint. In addition, the office has worked to strengthen its relationship with IAB through attending training led by IAB and also presenting at those same trainings to educate participants about our office and its mission. We also meet regularly with community policing advocates, including the Brennan Center, the New York Civil Liberties Union, the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, among others, to better understand the issues and concerns of their constituents and members of the community. These meetings have prompted investigations, including our assessment of the policies and procedures governing the department's CRT. OIG NYPD has an outreach director who is dedicated to connecting with the community at large through in-person and virtual events. Over the past 2 years, the outreach director has attended more than 200 such events at various venues across New York City. While these outreach efforts do not tend to generate leads for investigations, they are important efforts to connect with New Yorkers directly and explain what we do. These outreach efforts and relationships that we have with both government and community entities are integral to staying up to date on issues affecting police accountability in New York City and informing a local resource network in the police oversight arena. I want to speak for a moment about another related project that DOI is undertaking. We have a mandated oversight role in the settlement agreement relating to NYPD's policing of protests in the wake of the police killing of George Floyd. As part of Phase 2 of that settlement agreement, DOI has the primary role of reviewing 12 First Amendment activities, protests, to be selected by a collaborative review committee which the DOI commissioner will chair. We will conduct that review at specified intervals during a 36-month time period, which will include determining the department's compliance with settlement terms, reporting findings, and issuing recommendations. To that end, DOI received funding for 5 additional staff to form a new protest settlement monitoring unit, consisting of an inspector general, 2 special counsels, and 2 investigators. Those staff have been hired and will join the agency in March. Due to the discrete and time-sensitive nature of their work, which is also time-limited over a 3-year period, they are a separate unit from the OIG NYPD, but they will operate with guidance and input from Inspector General Barrett, as well as, of course, DOI's executive staff. Let me now turn to the pending legislation before us today. And I'm going to start with Intro 1020-2024. This proposed local law has several elements. First, it would amend the city charter to require the DOI commissioner to fill a vacancy in the position of the Inspector General for OIG NYPD within 90 days. While this timeframe mirrors the deadline set in the city charter for the hiring of the first Inspector General for this unit in 2014, it is not realistic in today's hiring environment. We support expedient hiring for all of our open positions, including, of course, Inspector Generals and the Inspector General for OIG NYPD. However, a 90-day timeframe is not realistic in light of the challenges we have had and continue to have in hiring new staff. That short time frame presumes no delays or obstacles arriving in the interview or background process or in the onboarding of candidates. It would also take full budgetary support to ensure that a competitive salary was available for the position. This proposed law would also require DOI to publicly report the following information relating to OIG NYPD: the subject matter of any investigation related to NYPD open for more than 3 years, descriptions of incidents where NYPD restricted or significantly delayed access to any information that the office required, or if NYPD interfered with the office's duties, and third, the number of investigations related to the department that were closed without issuing a report during the preceding calendar year. DOI certainly supports as much transparency as possible around the work that we do, as long as it will not compromise or interfere with our investigations. We can readily identify the number of investigations open for more than 3 years, and I am pleased to note that due to the office's efforts, largely in 2023, to complete and close older matters, we currently have no such investigations. However, for the most part, consistent with our practice, we will not be able to identify the subject matter of those investigations. Similarly, we could share instances of interference with our investigations or delays in the receipt of materials though I note that there have been no such interferences during my tenure. There have been delays, which we've addressed, as I mentioned. However, we may not be able to share the details of our request to the department because doing so would reveal the subject matter of those investigations. We are also able to share the number of investigations closed without issuing a report during the preceding calendar year, and during the past calendar year, there were none, but we likely will not be able to identify the subject matter of those investigations either. I also note that additional reporting does take time away from the other work that we do, and with a limited staff, and despite the relatively straightforward nature of the proposed reporting obligation, it may not be the best use of our resources. Let me turn now to Resolution 0560. This resolution calls on DOI to conduct an investigation to ascertain what mayoral administrations knew about environmental toxins produced by the September 11th terrorist attacks, and to submit a report to the City Council. The health and safety of New Yorkers is paramount, and DOI understands that the goal of this resolution is to provide critical answers to lingering questions about the information that was available to New York City government historically about risks to health and safety arising from the 9/11 attacks. This type of investigation would require an analysis of materials dating back 2 decades, and therefore would call for a deep dive into archived materials to ascertain the existence and content of relevant records. Individuals who worked in prior administrations would also need to be identified, located, and interviewed, as well as individuals affected by these events. In addition to a substantial investigative staff, a full understanding of the relevant records and witness interviews likely would require environmental experts, medical experts, and possibly others with specialized skills to be part of the staff for such an investigation. To undertake an investigation of this volume and scope, DOI would need funding to hire the sort of team I just mentioned of investigators, attorneys, and experts, as well as a dedicated inspector general. At our current staffing levels, we would not be able to undertake the work of this importance and magnitude with the in-depth analysis that it would call for and deserve. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by Councilmember Salam. I will start and then turn it over to my colleagues. I just want to say about the bills, certainly the Resolution 560, which is a very novel way to try to get the folks who are impacted by September 11th have been trying, as you know, for years to get this information. It exists. It exists. And I have to say, I don't think it's as complicated. You'll hear that later as what you're outlining. So I think it's something that's doable with, yes, a few more staff. So it's of the utmost importance, I think, to New Yorkers to understand, because I think, again, back to what you and I believe, which is government needs to be as transparent as possible, and particularly in today's world where people are very, very skeptical of their government providing providing support for their needs. This would be an example. So I hope that we were able to come to some agreement on that. And the same, I think there's lots of room for negotiation on the other bill regarding the IG office, but I hope that we can work together on that. I know you said 9 members, which I know it's hard to recruit. Other agencies are having the same problem. But I wanted to know within that number, how many investigators, data analysts, policy, attorneys, et cetera. How do you break down that number?
Let's see. So let me run through with you how the current 9 divides up. We have 2 investigative policy analysts, 1 investigative project analyst, 1 director of outreach, 1 executive manager, 2 deputy inspectors general, 1 first deputy inspector general, and 1 inspector general.
Okay.
And DOI also has a special counsel, and our special counsels support groups of squads. So we have one special counsel who supports OIG and NYPD, but also supports 3 other squads.
Okay, so what you're saying, I know you said earlier you're trying to bolster with some of the other staff member in your office.
Right, I haven't obviously identified all of those.
Right, but that's within the 9, makes sense. And so, how many vacant, what would you like to see that office be in terms of if you're able to hire? What would be I think you gave a number, what was that?
Well, when we met in 2022, I said I'd like to see 20 to 25. Now that was early in my tenure and before the sort of budget environment that we've now been in for several years. I think a more realistic assessment, although not realistic within our current staffing, would be 15 to 20. That doesn't mean I think we can get to 15 to 20 immediately, but I think that would be, a more realistic number now.
Okay, have you had people resign in the last couple of years, and how is the average tenure? Because obviously, this work, I know from this wonderful staff that we have on our committee, that it is really helpful to have people stay, get expert advice, expertise, blah, blah, blah. So how have people resigned, and what's the average tenure?
So the rate of attrition most recently last year was quite high. It was 46%.
Okay.
And the average tenure is approximately 4 years.
Okay.
So not taking your point, not as high as we would like. Institutional relationships and knowledge are obviously very important in this work that we do. But these are challenging times, and people also have their own reasons, obviously, professional career and personal for leaving.
Okay. Does the 2015 annual report that the office did contain an organizational chart for the office? Does the office continue to maintain such a chart? Is it publicly available, et cetera? I think that's helpful for people to know, understand what exactly is in the office.
We do have an organizational chart that lays out the positions that you mentioned. I don't know that it's included in our annual report. I don't believe that it's otherwise publicly available at this time.
Could you make it publicly available?
I don't see why not. I mean,
Okay.
we'd have to, I just want to make sure we're being consistent. And I want to think about if we're going to do it for this squad, we're going to do it across the agency. So before sort of making a commitment to that, I'd like to think about it. But
Okay.
the structure is what it is.
People are asking for the chart who are around in 2015. I'm just letting you know. That's of interest to them.
People who saw it in 2015 are
Yes,
interested
would like to
in-
see it again.
Yeah, so let us consider.
I know people, because I've been around forever. I know people who are around forever, and they are asking for it. And I won't mention who they all are, but believe me, I know them. So what to you would be a highly functioning and effective IG office? What are the metrics you use to measure the success? In other words, I know you mentioned the number of reports pretty consistent, as an example. And then the other issue with percentage of recommendations accepted by the police department, the range of topics investigated. I don't know, it's hard to know what would be the best measure, but I think we need some measure. And, maybe how it compares to other squads, which, you can have other squads. Unfortunately, the police department is always going to be the one that people pay most attention to.
Yeah, this squad actually, in terms of, since its focus is report writing, it issues more reports than on an annual basis, I would think, than any other individual squad. There may be some that come close certain years, but generally they issue more, they certainly issue more reports overall than any individual squad in the agency on an annual basis. Certainly that's true over the last 2 years. I think, to answer your question, and I think this is something that more staffing would help with, I would like us to be able to do more proactive inquiries and issue reports more quickly. And to be clear, this is a challenge across the agency, and there are different pressures and priorities, and sometimes the timing shifts for various reasons. But I think being able to speak on issues of importance to the public as close in time as possible to when those issues arise is most valuable, because public attention tends to move quickly from issue to issue, and I think we have the most momentum when we're able to speak promptly. I think the social media report, is a good example of a tight turnaround. Would we have wanted it to be even faster and issue that report at the end of last year? That was our goal. Early January, I'll take that, given the tremendous work that it took on the part of IG Barrett and her staff to make that possible, on top of the other reports that they did last year.
I mean, one thing that's going to appear, I think, I mean, we're all trying to figure out ICE, we're all trying to be understanding of what their concerns are, the president, the governor, the mayor, the migrants, but there is information flowing. I spend a lot of time with the migrants. I'm even a mentor, or whatever the hell it's called, guardian for, I go to court and I tell people I'll make sure they don't get deported. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I'm doing it. So my question then is, what is, information is flowing out sometimes incorrectly. You have to check every piece of information, but the city and the police department, to their credit, are saying this is what the cops are supposed to do, this is what DSS is supposed to do, but this would be an example for me, a timely report, is that what's happening? Because in some cases, the people at the shelters are telling families to stay home. That means the kids aren't going to school. You get the picture. Mm-hmm. So this is a new realm, a new issue, and I would think that would this be the kind of thing that would be proactively, you would be thinking about? It would take investigators going into the field, because this is a field sort of thing. I'm just asking because this is what's on everyone's mind right now.
Look, certainly, that is part of the operations of the police department. The one thing I want to be clear about is that it takes, even for something that might seem relatively straightforward, it takes time, particularly if you're talking about doing an operation involving surveillance, which is not typically what this unit does. But this is why we want to have conversations with you and with members of the community. We want to be responsive to the community's concerns. So yes, is that something we could look at within our mandate? Absolutely.
Okay. I know you did a report, as you mentioned, on community with, we call it CRT, Community Response Team, indicating that the units lacked a mission statement as well as any written policies or procedures relating selection, training of unit members, or policing strategies. Did you look also at, to review the activities of CRT officers, such as the BWC videos, arrest and summonses data, and TRI reports? And if so, do you have or will you have any findings about their actions, such as constitutionality, use of force incidents, citizen complaints, or effectiveness? I mention that because I am no expert here, but the CRT does come up a lot.
Well, it does come up a lot. It came up a lot in conversations that we had, and that's why we looked at it. The first report we did not get into those areas. It was really a foundational report, given how little public information was available about these units. We wanted to establish, what are the practices, what are the policies, what are they, how do they work? The phase two that we're undertaking this year could look into a range of deeper issues, including what are the disciplinary histories of the officers, what can we discern about the conduct that occurs on the street, what is the data about the effectiveness of their work, and what does that show?
Okay. I'm going to call on my colleague for some questions, and then I'll come back. Councilmember Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'll start here. Are there any permanent measures the OIG's office has put in place to ensure that the office continues to consistently produce quality reports? And I just wanted to ground that question in something I saw earlier today, or was it last night, about the president seeking to fire all of the IGs, which, as you can imagine, is terrible. And we obviously view your offices as extremely important, and want the work to continue regardless of who may come and go and whatever administration may exist or may prioritize IG offices over another.
So to take that part of the question first, there are statutory protections in place for the DOI commissioner. I suppose that if your question is, are there statutory protections in place for specific inspectors general? There are not, but as the Inspector General Office for the city, I think the protection we have is conferred by the protection for the commissioner's role, which requires, among other things, a statement of reasons were, a mayor to choose to terminate a DOI commissioner. There's obviously also the city council confirmation process, which is another way of ensuring both the independence of the Inspector General, and also ensuring that the City Council is comfortable with, the qualifications of that person, which could be relevant to the evaluation of any such statement of reasons that might be produced in the event of termination. So I think that's the sort of global protection for the office. Obviously, the law needs to be followed for it to be effective. So we could have a whole other conversation about that. In terms of the steps that we've taken internally in the office to address the first part of your question, to produce quality reports, it's really a sort of planning and collaborative, in-depth process that really starts with Inspector Barrett and I, and other members of the executive team and members of her team, which is first kind of conceptualizing the topics that we're going to look at, which, as we've said, can come from a variety of sources, and then sort of careful planning from the requests that we need to make, the documents and interviewees we need to access, which we try to make, as tailored and efficient as possible, so that we're really getting what we need, both so we can get it quickly and also so that we can issue reports as quickly as possible. And then a pretty in-depth back and forth in terms of outlines, reviewing together, the information that we're receiving, documentation of the reviews that we do, of records that we get, of people that we interview, sort of building towards, the conclusions and recommendations that we make, which are then, in a public report. And the goal of that is to sort of streamline the reporting process, so we're not in a place where, as work is reviewed sort of later stage, when a report is already partially drafted, either Inspector General Barrett or I think we need to change it. So the idea is, let's figure out at the beginning what we're going to do. Let's readjust as we learn more, as we see what the facts are showing us, and let's sort of have each step be building towards that final public report.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you gather different forms of sources to determine which cases, or how you would determine different investigations. So once you gather that information, what is the internal process to determine what to investigate?
I don't know how to describe it other than it's somewhat organic. We have a lot of incoming, and I think we literally sit together and we discuss what are the most important issues that we should focus on right now. That's how CRT emerged last year. Obviously, social media, we were actually already tracking all of that, but getting Speaker Adams's request made clear that we were gonna, move quickly on that report at the time that we did. So it's really a process, relying on IG Barrett's expertise, our knowledge historically of what the office has done. We try to keep an eye on what other inspectors general for police departments across the major cities in the U.S. are doing. We have conversations, with advocacy groups, members of the City Council, and then we really sort of take that information and we think, okay, where can we be most effective here? So there's no formula, and we try to be flexible so that we can respond to what the areas of greatest need and impact.
So it seems like it's based off of maybe whether or not you see a systematic issue, and or whether or not it's a trending issue. Is that fair to say? Well,
certainly what we were talking about with complaints, we may get a complaint about a certain type of officer misconduct, or we might see one complaint about the conduct of an entity suspected to be a community response team. In that example, people didn't always know, what unit the officers were affiliated with. We wouldn't generally start an investigation off one complaint, but if we were seeing complaints, let's say, that come into our office through phone, email, et cetera, and we were speaking to advocacy groups and they were mentioning it, and we're looking around online and we're seeing there's not a lot of information, all of those things would lead us to think this is a broader issue than just one complaint. This is potentially a systemic problem, and that's what we're looking for. And then among those, we try to think, what is it that we can really contribute here, and move forward on that basis.
Okay, I'm actually going to turn to social media. You released a report yesterday. I'm going to look at it. An assessment of NYPD's use of social media. I actually introduced a bill seeking to curb usage of social media for like political type reasons. So, question for you is how many staff members worked on the report? And then I'll just read, this is very wordy, but in your first finding, you found that certain ex posts made by members of NYPD's executive staff on official city accounts were unprofessional and encouraged an unproductive public discourse. They violated department policies related to being courteous and civil and raised questions with respect to whether they may be deemed prohibited engagement in political activity by city employees. Have any referrals been made to other agencies, including CCRB or the NYPD's Department Advocate's Office related to this finding? If not, why not?
Okay, so let me take your first question, the number of people who worked on this report, excluding supervisors, excluding IG Barrett and myself and other supervisors in the office. There were 6 people whose work contributed to this report. That includes, for example, one of our data analysts. So it wasn't just the staff of the unit. There was a data analyst involved. One of the special counsels assisted, other members of senior staff. So we had 6 people whose work contributed to that report, obviously at different degrees. Some people are spending more time on it. Some people are spending less. In terms of referrals, the report really is the referral, right? So the report goes to the police department. They can choose, and to the public, right? So there are issues there that relate to the use of public resources like official social media accounts. Those are there for those organizations should they choose to take action. We didn't make any sort of specific referrals, and whether we do that or not, really varies based on the nature of the report. Our primary findings here related to the lack of policies and procedures to ensure oversight, to ensure that these types of communications, don't happen and won't happen again.
Okay. Another interesting thing that I did not know, because I have not yet read the report, but I'm like increasingly more interested to read the report. You criticized several social media posts from personal accounts of a council member claiming that they inevitably intensified tension and mistrust between the department and communities it services. Why was this included in a report on the NYPD's use of social media? In your executive summary for that report, you note that the mayor's office publicly requested that investigation look at council members' social media as well. Did the mayor actually direct you to investigate council members' use of social media? And does your criticism of the council member have anything to do with the mayor's request?
So we received no request from the mayor's office or anyone else at City Hall beyond we noted the statement that was made publicly that you just referred to. And that's a quote from an article, I think, that was quoting one of the mayor's public statements. The reason that we reflected on the communications by the city council member and by other members of the public where appropriate in the report is that these social media posts did not occur in a vacuum. They were part of, at least the ones we focused on, they were part of a dialogue. And there were times where we felt that both parties to the dialogue would have done a better job had they sort of taken the tone down, been more disciplined in their communications, used the social media platform as a way, to have a meaningful discussion on important issues rather than to attack each other, to attack the police department, to attack the council member. And so we felt to be fair in assessing these conversations, we had to assess them in context, and that means looking at both sides of the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the report, that you reached no conclusion on whether or not the tweets made by members of NYPD's executive staff on official city accounts were quote unquote political activity. Overall, I think my issue is that, if Chief Shell had like a personal X account and he made those tweets, whatever, it's your personal account. My personal issue with it is the fact that it's like an official government account being used to go back and forth with an individual council member, I feel is a little egregious, because council members themselves have we have dichotomy, right? Where we're government actors, but then by nature we're also like political actors, and so sometimes the line is a little blurred. Whereas like someone who has a government job using a government account, I think it feels a little gray around the usage of the government account. Like, again, do whatever you want to do on your personal account, have nothing like whatever free speech, do what you gotta do, but it's the usage of a government account to engage in that exchange is the thing for me that felt a little egregious. But I mean, I guess I would say, in your view, do you think these tweets accomplish a city purpose or a non-city purpose? Why? And did Chief Shell agree with this when the investigators asked him about his purpose?
So let me start by saying I totally agree with you that this is a gray area, and that's why what the report finds, and there are really only 2 tweets that we thought raised the question of whether there was use of a government social media account to engage in political activity, and those were 2 tweets that related to voting. And while there was no specific candidate mentioned, there's no pending election, primary or otherwise, the statement, "Vote the change you seek," raised a question as to whether that was political activity or not. We didn't resolve that question because it is a gray area. It's a complex issue, which is why in this case we did not take a position on the law. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We didn't hear, for just the reason you said, that it is a gray area. I think, as I recall from the interview-related memos that I looked at, the department's view, at least at that time, was that that was not political activity because there was no pending election, there was no urging to vote for a particular candidate. Whether
That sounds like sounds like their internal lawyers like came up with a rationale, but that
right. I mean,
sense.
we're not endorsing. That's part of. We're not endorsing any particular conclusion on that. We sort of put the issue out there so that members of the public and any other body that might want to look into it has the facts that we found.
Councilmember Salam, you have questions.
Good morning.
Morning.
I want to know what are the rates of NYPD agreeing with the recommendations given by the DOI, and how does that compare to other agencies?
So the rates from, let me just get to the actual statistic for you. So looking at recommendations from 2021 through 2025, and I want to note that the last 3 reports that we did are not included here because the police department has 90 days to respond. And I want to also give you a little bit of information about how we calculate this so the numbers, make sense. We had 240 recommendations that we issued from 2015 to 2025. And the categories we use are implemented, partially implemented, accepted in principle, which means, yes, we've accepted this, but not necessarily that the department has taken steps to actually implement it. For those, we group those 3 categories I just mentioned to you: implemented, partially implemented, and accepted in principle. And that rate is 67.5% for the police department. The other categories are they're still considering the recommendation, they've rejected it, or it no longer applies. The largest category there is rejected, which is 30.8%. In terms of how that compares, my understanding is the agency-wide rate, and we could break it down, agency by agency. Well, I shouldn't say that we could. It's probably not as easy as I think. But the agency-wide rate of implementation calculated using those brackets I just gave you is about 85%, I believe, at least the last time I ran those numbers, which was not yesterday. So it does fluctuate depending on, we issue a big report with a large number of recommendations. It can really, the numbers can swing. But they are, based on this calculation, they are below other agencies citywide. And if I have to tweak that when I run the other numbers, I'll let you know. But that's my understanding.
So in principle, how many in principle would be the number you said?
67% for the police
67%
department.
principal.
More in the 80s for the rest of city agencies to whom we make recommendations.
Do you know also how often they do get implemented?
Do I have the implementation rate specifically? Yeah, 50.4%. So the category that I gave you also includes partially implemented and accepted in principle. Those are at 7.5 and 9%, 9.6% respectively. That's how we get to a total of 67.
Also, is there any indication that the NYPD agrees to implement fewer DOI recommendations, and if so, why?
Well, I mean, we get an explanation. I don't have sort of a global answer to the question, and I'll note that the data I'm giving you spans a 10-year period, so that's different administrations, different police departments. I think I can categorize some of the common responses for recommendations that are not implemented. One category, for example, we do a report on the Post-Act, and particularly our first Post-Act report, which was issued in 2022, November of 2022, we made recommendations that went outside the statutory requirement because we thought the department should be doing more than the Post-Act required. And a very large majority of those got rejected. So that's like one category. If the department is operating under a legal framework like the Post-Act, which as I understand it, was hotly negotiated and debated, recommendations that they do more than the statute requires, those were not well received. We've had other types of recommendations, just off the top of my head with our overtime report. We wanted the department to go to an outside expert to conduct a greater study than we were able to conduct in our report, which was based on a small sample size, on the negative effects of overtime. And I believe, and IG Barrett maybe can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the response to that was we have sufficient in-house resources to do that. We don't need to go to the outside. We've got that expertise. Sometimes the response is we are already doing what you ask us to do, even though we may not think it's being done to a sufficient extent. And then for some areas, I'm thinking now about like the gang database report, where the department actually accepted a significant percentage of our recommendations. There were some areas where they just disagreed with us as a policy matter. We thought there should be reviews of an individual's status in the database more frequently, and the department disagreed. They said, like, we're not going to do that review as often as you say we should. We wanted other sort of stringent mechanisms in place if the review wasn't done on a timely basis, like dropping people from the database if they hadn't been reviewed on time automatically. The department said, no, we're not going to do that. So sometimes there's a policy, really what I would describe as a policy disagreement. They don't accept, for whatever reason, our view of, how an issue should be handled.
And this is my last question. Does the DOI believe city council should look to enact laws, local laws, to enforce recommendations made by DOI and rejected by the NYPD?
That's a question I think I would want to answer on a case-by-case basis because our recommendations really vary. I mean, sometimes they're very specific, sometimes they involve broader policy change. So I would want to think about that. The city council support is very important to us, and I think it plays a very important role. Part of the reason that we issue these reports, publicly and in detail, so that there really is a blueprint for what we're proposing. But I would just want to be thoughtful on whether and which aspects of what we propose are best handled through legislation versus some other way. But that is certainly a dialogue we would want to have, and if the council is interested in doing that, we would very much want to be a part of that process and very much appreciate, the focus and attention to the work that we're doing with the NYPD.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is my ignorance picking up on council members' questions. So on the gang database, which was going to be one of my questions, what got accepted and what didn't, and you just sort of listed them. So that would be on the website. It would say accepted, rejected, et cetera.
So I listed some of them.
Yeah, you did. I'm just saying I want to know how I could, if I wasn't here, know.
So in our annual report, every year, we give the most up-to-date status. So I think that would be the place I would
Okay.
direct you to.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. I'm always got ideas. So the city council enacted legislation, as we know, eliminating jaywalking as a criminal violation because it was selectively enforced. Officers made jaywalking stops sometimes only in certain neighborhoods, mostly against black and brown individuals. So here would be an example. Has the IG reviewed the police department's enforcement of any other quality of life violations to examine whether they are being selectively enforced? Would such a study be helpful? And then just generally looking at the enforcement of disorderly conduct. These are the quality of life challenging issues. I want to know, is that the kind of thing that you might look at?
It is something that the office has looked at previously, not during my tenure, but a number of years ago, and that is the kind of work that we could do. It requires data. We have data analysts on staff. These are very complicated questions because a disparity in enforcement, raises questions. It doesn't necessarily give you the cause of that disparity, but absolutely that is the kind of thing that we could look at.
This is where you need your 15 staff members, 15 to 20 staff members. Another idea.
At least.
Okay, so I've been out with Be Heard. I have great respect for the social workers, the EMS workers, the police department, it's hard to know with people with mental illness. It is the #1 issue in New York right now. They often have unfortunate lives and outcomes. So would the IG have the expertise and capacity to look into the police department's handling of emotionally disturbed persons? For example, the extent to which officers receive crisis intervention training. I know it's been talked about, but it needs to be looked at. How often there's a co-responder, those are the social workers, and whether the PD tracks and analyzes its encounters with these individuals. Are there any reviews of high-profile incidents? This is the issue in New York City right now.
So
I could do a report a week.
It is a very important issue right now. It is also an issue, again, not during my tenure, that the office did a report on, not necessarily addressing all of the things you're mentioning, some of which are obviously current issues, but we did do a report on law enforcement's addressing involvement with people who are in mental health crisis and different responding systems that might be put in place to address those circumstances. And yes, that is another issue, that we could look at. As I think these questions show, these are very complicated, issues, sometimes involving multiple agencies, right? A coordinated multi-agency approach. And some of this stuff is happening in real time, and it can take a while to get data, not necessarily just because of delays, but because it takes a while for the data to exist and following people through the system, et cetera. But yes.
Post-pandemic, that needs to be done. Post-pandemic, that needs to be done. Recently, as you know, there's a change in policies under the current commissioner, an approach to vehicle pursuits. And I think hopefully fewer vehicle pursuits. So has the Inspector General done any review or analysis of this issue? Have you been in contact with the police department regarding their change in policy, what prompted it? And have you looked at the vehicle pursuit forms and whether officers are properly completing these forms when they are supposed to?
I don't think we have looked at that. CRT is involved in vehicle-related pursuits, conduct, et cetera. So some of that may have come to us in the course of that review. But no, those are not issues that we've looked at, but they're certainly issues we could look at.
Okay. And the stop and frisk monitor, which exists, has reported on PD officers' failure to complete stop reports when they are required. It has been noted that officers too often fail to turn in on a timely basis their BWCs, and I know there's a whole issue about filling out forms, and I hope the new commissioner, because I've seen paper up to the ceiling, and I hope it is pre-populated and online and stopped with this craziness. So that's another topic to look at from your perspective. Why is there so much paper and not more technology? So have you looked at whether officers are properly completing this type of report and other TRI reports? That would be another topic. Is that something that's on your list?
Look, it is not.
I have another 10 of them here.
I mean, we should have we can have this conversation now or at any time. These are all good ideas. They're not things we are currently working on. We did do some force reporting and the completion of forms relating to the use of force. Again, not in the last couple of years, but a number of years ago, just to show that these are the sorts of things that we certainly have the expertise to do. We have to pick our topics very carefully given the limited team that we have.
I know I'm running out of time, but what are you doing to proactively monitor sanctuary city laws, including detain and request laws, a little bit that I mentioned earlier? You've got also your squad and your IG at the Department of Correction. Obviously, there's a connection in here. This is what's on everyone's mind. Is that something that you're going to be looking at?
You know, I don't know, and I can't say yet whether that's something we're going to be looking at. We're certainly currently in the process of familiarizing ourselves with the applicable local laws, the policies, our own policies in the first instance, and then, you know, looking closely at what's going on around the city. This is obviously, you know, a very new issue.
Okay. And I know you mentioned, to your credit, that getting data is much better. You have somebody who's assigned to work on that. Do you think that's going to be something that will work out with that kind of data?
You know, I do. I think it has been working. You know, the new system I mentioned is not just for data, but it's basically having a point person who is an attorney within the department who can be responsive to our requests.
Okay. You are saying that the office hasn't examined any issues other than the topics reported on publicly, but there are many more topics to pursue, and I think that's what we've been talking about. What do you attribute the substantial recent attrition that you mentioned, quite a high number in the department?
You know, I think it's hard to say. I mean, some people, you know, have higher education that they've decided to pursue. Some people have left the city. You know, I can't kind of give you chapter and verse on it. It is high. It's certainly concerning to us, but you know, it's hard to give you a real explanation for each individual's personal decision.
My staff stays 20 years. I just want you to know. What are the formal mechanisms in place to track trends in complaints? That's really important. What are the formal mechanisms to track complaints? In other words, Gail Brewer calls up, says, you know, I have a complaint. Yeah. How do you track it? I know you mentioned that you track, even if you refer to CCRB or to the Federal Monitor or whatever, you keep track. Right. But how do you do all that?
So we have a searchable case management system that we've had for many, many years, and we record and document all of the complaints that we receive, whether we refer them out or not. We have recently upgraded to a new system that is about to go live that will give us an even more fine-tuned ability, let's say, to run tags and search terms. So not only could you input a complaint into the system and then, you know, search it in various ways, you'll now be able to tag it as related to one of the community response teams, or related to, you know, stop and frisk, and then you will be able to literally like push a button and generate stats about that particular type of complaint. So that's how we're going to do it going forward.
And that's not public, right? Or is it public?
No, it's not public. Like it's like our internal database case management system. It is very much not public.
Okay. Is DOI aware of any discipline imposed on employees identified or having violated the policies, the police policies, per yesterday's, as we heard from Council Member Williams, social media report?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay. Public outreach. All right. Can you talk, I know you mentioned some of the public outreach places, libraries and so on that you go. Can you talk about it? Because I think that's good. I mean, I think it's good to do that. I think it's also good, though, to go to the field and do the same kind of investigation. So are you doing both outreach in terms of telling people what the office does, which is important, but also do you have enough staff to do investigation in the field?
We don't really do investigation in the field, no, with our current staff, meaning, no, we're not out there as observers, you know, for the most part. I do think when we work with this new protest settlement monitoring unit.
In March, starting in March.
Starting in March, the staff of that unit will be in the field as necessary, and I think that'll be potentially an important part of their work.
I feel they have to be in the field, just FYI. Okay. And so how many outreach events did you do in 2024, approximately?
I believe our director of outreach attended over 200 events and attended and participated in over 200 events. Maybe the number is 230.
Okay. I know you talked about 1020, the introduction. Do you have some, I know you have some concerns about it, you listed them, but would you have some amendments to suggest that it could be applicable to what your interests are? Are there suggestions that you have?
I mean, I think the suggestions are the ones that I mentioned, so reporting on numbers versus subject matters, or reporting on, instances of interference or delays past a certain number of days, but not the subject matter of those requests. Those were the principal concerns with those were just that they not inadvertently reveal the subject matter of investigations.
Okay, so you feel that it's possible to have a discussion to try to get out what we're interested in and address your concerns?
I do.
Okay. This intro 560, which is, all of us, I have more friends dying now, I think we all do, perhaps than died during that day. It means everything to us. And I think it's great that it was actually to Sam Goldsmith's credit that he came up with Section 803. I can't believe that it's that difficult to come up with the type of data in the archives that would at least give some indication, some memos here and there. And you'll hear later that there are discussions that have taken place. Do you think you have to go to the great extent that you mentioned in your testimony in order to do this kind of investigation and report?
I mean, I don't know that what I mentioned was intended to suggest that there was an insurmountable difficulty. My concern is having the staff and expertise to do it justice. I mean, I do think that you need a comprehensive effort to identify records that could be, 20 years old, 15 years old. I think you need medical expertise to understand the implications of what people knew. I think, so I'm not suggesting that those are not, standard parts of an investigation, not that there's anything standard about that situation, but those are aspects of investigations that we do. We can contract with, outside firms if there's, specialized expertise that we don't have in-house. So my point is not that it couldn't be done, it's that it is a significant undertaking to which we would want to devote the right staff and significant staff. And I think from the discussions that we've had, including the discussion today, that's not personnel that we currently have. We would certainly not want to do something like this and not do it right.
I'm a big believer in you having more staff, as you know.
I know.
I feel strongly that the public deserves to have investigations that are complete and produce the kind of quality that you're interested in. So I'm a big believer, and
we appreciate
OMB
that.
should wake up. I just want to say that another reason to do this, I don't know what the next crisis is, just in terms of people's health. Not to mention other issues, but just health, and that's what is of concern in this particular case. I don't know if this bird flu was coming around, I don't know. And I do feel that this would be an example of what the city did or didn't know, so that the public feels comfortable the next time, maybe that the city didn't know anything, and that's fine, or maybe they did. But the next time, they should be more honest, and that would what I think might show, who knows? But I am concerned about being honest for the next public emergency that we might have. Councilmember Williams had a question.
Thank you. So to your point about trends and things that you all have been looking into, in 2023, you released a report on NYPD overtime and the increased risks of negative policing. The NYPD accepted 2 of the 6 recommendations from the report, and as of the 2024 annual report, however, the NYPD has not made any specific policy changes in response to the recommendations. What can you tell us about the status of the NYPD's implementation of those recommendations?
Well, I think you're probably getting that information from the annual report, and that's going to be the most recent data that we have about the status. There's a process that we begin probably in the next month or so, right, to start. We issue the annual report generally later in the year, but because it involves extensive back and forth with the police department, in the next couple months, we will start the conversation with them about the status, and at that point, we would have updated information. But right now, what we have is, the information that you just described.
Okay, and you kind of answered another question here, but now I want to ask you explicitly, which is, as you track the implementation of the recommendations from any of your reports, the statuses of the recommendations often change, sometimes from rejected to implemented, or even from partially implemented to rejected. The NYPD, however, only appears to provide an initial response to the report and recommendations. So is it more so like that internal back and forth? And then do you kind of update the status?
Exactly. So
Okay.
the process is there's a statutorily mandated response 90 days after we issue a report that goes through each recommendation. To the extent that the department's position changes, and it can change in the ways that you just described, we would note that in our annual report, and if in the dialogue that we're having with them there is an explanation, we will put that explanation in the report as well. So that becomes then the best, summary of the current status.
Okay, and I know you will have your internal conversations coming up soon, but the NYPD rejected 4 of the 6 recommendations from the overtime report, including ones that would have required the NYPD to develop a system to track off-duty employment by officers, and that the NYPD hire a consulting firm to identify solutions to mitigate those risks. What do you make of these rejections? And has the NYPD engaged in further discussion about them?
So we haven't, right, as you said, we haven't had further discussion about those yet. We will in the coming months. I'm obviously speculating to some extent and going off of the explanations that were given, at the time that those were rejected. But I think for some of them, the view was there was no need for that kind of assessment, because it was being, the work of analyzing the impacts of overtime was being done in-house. Some of the other ones may fall into the other category I described, which is the department might take the view they're already doing enough in that area. They've got enough policies and procedures in place. So.
Okay, and just one question on the chair's bill, because I know you had stated that you feel, given the challenges, that the 90 days might be too short of a window. And I understand that, but would you agree that like the continuity and accountability that is so important with this office be upheld by kind of like quickly making a replacement?
I mean, absolutely. This is obviously, it's a critical role in this unit and in all our other units, and whenever we have, the need to fill one of those positions, we try to do that as quickly as possible. It's just not always something where we can promise a particular time frame. It's not totally within our control, and there can be challenges in filling all the positions that we have right now.
Okay, and then lastly, do you have any current recommendations on like further legislation that we could introduce as a council to strengthen the work, whether it's, to strengthen the work around like the reporting and accessibility of information within the department, or, the lack of a particular recommendation being taken up by the department? Do you have any current recommendations that you feel, should or might require a legislative remedy that we can take up?
I don't right now, but I really appreciate the question, and I think that one of the things that we've been doing sort of across the agency as we look and try to assess the status of implementation of all the recommendations we make is really think about what are the most important, and we would welcome the opportunity to come back to you, as we look back over the work that the unit has done, if there are specific recommendations that we think are critical, that are still relevant, and that are not implemented. So I don't have anything to offer today, but I appreciate that invitation very much, and I know there have been instances in the past where the council has taken recommendations we've made, and those have become legislation, and like I said before, we always appreciate that support very much.
Yeah, I think like, savvy council members will like look at the recommendations and think about, potential legislation, but the same way that you like make recommendations to the agencies, I think it would be really good to like make recommendations like to the chair or like even members of the committee around like, hey, the NYPD or, even other relevant agencies that you investigate didn't take up said recommendation. We think it might be useful to potentially introduce legislation to kind of like compel them to do it. That would be helpful.
Yep, no, I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I know you agreed to stay to listen to the next couple of panels. I appreciate that. And now we're going to call the next panel.
Thank you.
We're calling It's the 9. Okay, we're calling Andrew Carby, and we're calling Jim Rossi, and we're calling Thomas Hart. And if there are any other leaders of unions who have not filled out a slip, please do so. Okay.
Thank you.
John, you're not testifying? I wanted to be sure. No. Okay. Okay, because if you want to fill out a slip, I just want to be sure. Go ahead. Go ahead and start. I think, do you want to swear them in, or what are you doing now?
I don't need to swear them in.
You don't need to be sworn in. Go right ahead, sit down, and whomever would like to start.
Brewer, and good morning, Council. Good morning again, Chair Brewer and Council Member Williams. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Andrew Carboy. I'm an attorney, and along with my colleague, Matthew McCauley, we are pro bono counsel for 9/11 Health Watch, a not-for-profit World Trade Center health advocacy organization, and a group of September 11th first responders, residents of Lower Manhattan, and surviving family members of those lost because of World Trade Center exposure-related disease. On their behalf, in 2023, we filed a Freedom of Information Law request pursuant to New York State's Freedom of Information Law. Our clients seek no compensation. As their attorneys, we seek no legal fees. The shared goal that we have is strictly to find out what the city knew concerning the dangers of toxic substances released as a result of the terrorist attacks, and when the city learned of those dangers. We are here because September 11th continues to make people sick, be they first responders, recovery and utility workers who met the call in those awful, awful times, or simply public school students and residents of Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. New Yorkers live with the consequences of dust plumes, fires, and smoke that choked our city for months. Our requests to the mayor's office and city agencies are simple. We seek answers. What did the city know about air quality, and when did it learn it? Why the rush to reopen our public schools just blocks away from the burning debris and fires that raged on for months through early December 2001? What explains the gap between the city's messaging that the air quality was safe and it was safe to return to Lower Manhattan, as opposed to the air quality test the city was receiving in real time from its own sources, including utilities that did private testing? Where are those air quality test results today? Well, we posed these questions by filing our Freedom of Information Act request with the Mayor's Office, the Office of Emergency Management, and the Department of Environmental Protection. In denying our clients' requests and denying the similar requests made earlier by the New York City congressional delegation, Representatives Nadler, Maloney, and Goldman, the city denies the most significant day in its history. The city's September 11th archives must be thrown open today. The bases of the city's denial to our request are laughable. They are absurd, and I'm going to share them with the assembled members here today. We cannot believe that records concerning that terrible event, created in the days and weeks after September 11th, were destroyed on September.
You need to start to wrap up if you can.
I'm sorry?
Start to wrap up if you can.
Yes, I can. And we don't accept that the city's DEP, the city's lead agency in air quality, has none of the requested records. These records simply do not vanish from the archives. Because the city is denying more than that history, it's denying the legacy, the health effects of these terrible exposures. Men and women today live with the consequences each day of that terrible morning. Listen, for all we know, the city didn't genuinely appreciate the consequences of the collapse, but perhaps it did. We're never going to find out the answers to those questions unless we obtain these documents.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who would like to go next? Whoever. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's Matthew McCauley. I'm co-counsel with Mr. Carboy. I also present myself as a 9/11 first responder, myself, a survivor who worked down there, and as an advocate who's in D.C. with John Field. You know, these particular requests started as information requests by people like yourself who are looking for information. They're not set up as litigation issues. They are truly what we know is that we're trying to get the information as science is catching up to what we already know. The documents that are there and the information that's there from the city's response has been cryptic to concerning. You have on one side of it the city saying it doesn't know if it has any documents, and it says they have documents, and then they're asking for blanket immunity and liability protection if there are documents that are there. These are all things that throw up red flags. There's issues that have been there. It should have even come to a FOIL request. It should have been a presentation of these documents. To go back in time, most of the people here remember Geraldo Rivera opening up Al Capone's vaults. What's in the vaults? Is there anything in the vault? And most of us lost 2 hours of our lives waiting for the answer to that, which was more or less nothing. Here you have a situation where the city has these documents. They've alluded to the documents, but yet at the same time, there's no presentation whatsoever for them. We're now moving to the point of having DOI coming in to actually look and see whether to see if there's documents that are there. This is not something that they need to be doing. You know, these documents are out there. Let the city look at it. Right now, really important when it comes to this community is the World Trade Center Health Program is now embarked on what's called the youth cohort. The youth cohort involves people who are actually in their 40s right now, but there's actually a subsection of that study that involves the in utero population. Those women who became pregnant either while they were working on the pile, working downtown. That includes the police officers, the firefighters, EMS, all emergency workers that were working downtown. But let's not just focus on the responders. You have the survivors. This country turned around within days of 9/11 and showed the rest of the world we would not back down to terrorism. We would not cave into anything when it came to terrorists. And they went back to work. And when they went back to work, they went back down to Lower Manhattan. They filled the office buildings. They filled the areas and the buildings around it. They went back to work across the street. The information that's there that we're seeking may be relevant to those particular studies. An in utero study was never done. At this point, the only way your child is eligible, if you were pregnant at 9/11, the only way your child is actually eligible for health care is after you gave birth, if you brought the child back into New York. Most medical professionals would balk at that somehow this particular program doesn't even at least look at those children that were in utero at the time. The documentation that we have that may come out is something that we'd be looking at to turn over to the scientists. DOI doesn't need scientists. They don't need medical professionals to make those decisions. Those are supposed to be made by people who are undertaking studies. Unfortunately, DOI is being called into a situation where they have to look as to whether or not these documents actually exist. When Luis Alvarez testified before Congress, he made two very specific statements. One was that there was no place else in the world he wanted to be. There was no race, there was no politics, there was no religion. Everybody was down there for the common bond. Well, that was the exact same thing that happened when everybody came back to work. These are people in the community, I'm wrapping up, these are people who are in the community who need to be taken care of. Also, that people's families are not worth more than each other's. Take care of these families, take care of the responders, get the information so it can be analyzed.
Thank you.
That's all we're asking for at this point.
Thank you very much. Who would like to go next? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brewer, for holding this hearing today and sponsoring your resolution. My name is Thomas Hart. I'm the president of the Operating Engineers of Local 94. I represent over 6,000 members. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors for the 9/11 Health Watch and president of the Citizens for the Extension of the Zajoga Act. Both of these organizations are non-for-profit that have been created by the New York State AFL-CIO that advocate for the 9/11 responders and survivors. We also monitor the programs that were created to help 9/11 responders and survivors. Being a 9/11 responder myself, I serve as a member of the federal STAC Committee, which is the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee for the Victims of 9/11. At my Local 94, we vowed never to forget the horrific attacks that were committed on that morning. Our members are truly the first responders within each and every one of these buildings that they operate within our city. Our day-to-day responsibilities include the safety and the operation of these buildings and to maintain the safety of the tenants within the buildings. On September 11, we lost 4 members that worked at the World Trade Center site. We have been and still remain at the site and in all the surrounding buildings that were affected. The members of Local 94 have been exposed to these toxins, and today we still have members that are falling ill and being diagnosed with cancers as a result of the heroic actions taken on that day and the days since. I'm here today with our pro bono counsels Andrew Carbo and Matthew McCauley to speak in support of the council member Gail Brewer's binding resolution, Res 560, which, if passed, would require the City Department of Investigations to obtain and review the documents the city government has about the environmental hazards of the attack of 9/11 and determine essentially what the city knew about these hazards and when they knew it. Despite requests from members of Congress, Carolyn Maloney, and current members, Congressman Gerald Nadler and Dan Goldman, Freedom of Information request, and from the 9/11 Health Watch and Article 78 lawsuit to force the city to release documents relating to what the city knew about the dangers of these toxic chemicals in and around Ground Zeroes in these days, weeks, and months after the attack, and when did they know it? We still now, over 23 years later, do not know the answer. We know that based on reporting by Anthony DePalma at the New York Times in his article, Ground Zero's Illness Cloud, Giuliani's Legacy, May 14, 2007, that while city administration was saying the air was safe to breathe, they were privately predicting 10,000 liability claims for injuries from these toxic exposures. Whatever they were saying publicly about the safety of the air, it appears that the city was worried. Now it may turn out that the cities truthfully did not know and realize the dangers possessed by these chemicals that the terrorists unleashed on New York when the towers were destroyed. But we now know that based on thousands that we have gotten sick, both responders and survivors, and that the science since that the toxic chemicals were a hazard. We know that the members of Congress trying to get the answers doesn't work. We know that the FOIL doesn't work with the city. So the only resolve, this is by City Council through its power under this charter order, Department of Investigations, to look at the issue and report back. The only way my members and other 9/11 responder and survivors are going to know the truth is if City Council acts. Thank you, Chairwoman Brewer.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair Brewer. My name is Jim Sprosi. I represent the New York City Fire Officers Association, and I would like to thank you and the council for taking this very specific issue up on behalf of all of us and all the people who live and worked in and around Ground Zero. I would also say that I would implore the Department of Investigation to find the resources to take on this investigation. While it may be more difficult based on the amount of time that has passed, it is one of the most important things you can do for the transparency of government. I don't stand here just as a representative of the 7,500 officers that I represent, but also as a person who has lost a family member in 9/11, whose father has succumbed to 4 cancers associated with 9/11, whose brother has significant respiratory issues, and I myself was a 9/11 responder. And I can share with you, as I spent my time on the pile only very few days after 9/11, as I stood on West Street, standing on the 2nd floor looking at the pile, as I waited for one of my fellow firefighters to look through a marble notebook to see if his brother had been listed as a killed in action or killed in duty member, because that's how rudimentary the process had become. And as I stood there, I was approached by a member in full respiratory protection, something that was nowhere near available to our members while we were down there. And that member came to me without any knowing who I was other than being a firefighter and said, "You need to get out of this building." I said, "Why is that?" As I stood on 4 inches of ash, and he said, "Because the toxicity inside the building is very dangerous to your health. We just had a meeting with the Department of Environmental Protection, OEM in the city, and we're ordering all people outside the building without respiratory protection. Do yourself a favor, get outside and get respiratory protection." Ironically, by the time I returned to my car about 9 o'clock that night, 1010 Winds was reporting that the air quality south of Canal Street was acceptable. Anybody who spent a minute down there knew that it was anything less than acceptable. And anybody who knows what's happened here, when your excuse is for not producing documentation, when the New York City Fire Department maintains routine records of who's on duty for over 20 years, and you're telling me the most significant attack on American soil didn't give anybody in city government the wherewithal not only to save the records, but to have those records on file, to know the exposures that we subjected our people to, so that we would better reverse engineer how we would early detect these cancers. We can't undo the exposure that you've put us under. We can't stop the hundreds of people who have died since 9/11, but what we can do is at least expose these records, find out where the government failure occurred, if it did, and if there is further information that could better target the things that are killing our people to increase their lives, to increase their quality of life, then shame on us for not doing it. The reason people don't trust government is because our own government has put 10 obstacles in the way just to see the records. How dare they? We did the work. I'll say as first responders that we knew there was risk. I'll say that we measured that risk and we measured it against what our duty was and what you asked us to do. But how dare they not release the records? How dare this become a staffing issue? And how dare somebody tell me that the buildings were lost in a building, records were lost in a building that collapsed in the same day in which the event had occurred? We are reasonable people, but we're expecting a reasonable response from government. I can't thank you enough for taking this up. I know it's a bit of an end around and a very limited use of this tactic, if not the first time, but I appreciate your creativity and I appreciate you spearheading this and I appreciate your constant support for the firefighters and first responders in New York City. Thank you.
Good morning, Council Chair Brewer. Thank you for holding this hearing. It is very important that this information come out. My name is Andrew Ansbro. I'm the president of the Uniform Firefighter Association of Greater New York. I represent 20,000 active and retired New York City firefighters. Thousands of retired New York City firefighters are sick from what they're exposed to at ground zero. 24 years ago, I joined the FDNY and I left the academy in the summer of 2001. 9/11 was my first fire. I was in the lobby of the Marriott Hotel when the South Tower collapsed on it. I barely survived with my life. Many of those around me did not survive. In December of 2001, I had my first department medical. My lung capacity went from 95, 96% to 72% in 3 months. My lung capacity has never recovered. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. The World Trade Center collapse and cleanup was my only exposure at the time. I am not special. There are thousands of other stories just like mine. Almost everyone that worked there was affected. Tens of thousands are sick, and thousands have died since then. My father, NYPD Chief Michael Ansbro, also survived the collapse. He was at the command post with Mayor Giuliani when the South Tower came down. They and multiple other commissioners and chiefs sought refuge at 75 Barclay Street in between collapses. And my father told Rudy Giuliani, I responded to the 93 bombing and I know that asbestos was inside the Twin Towers. There were also building engineers from Local 94 working at 75 Barclay Street. They were in that room. They agreed about the asbestos and went and got the paper painter's masks and handed them out to everyone that was there. That's how Giuliani ended up with his face protection that day. Mayor Giuliani was told about the danger before the second tower even came down. We all knew something was in the air. We just didn't know how bad it was. Eventually, the mayor and City Hall found out how bad it was, and they chose to lie about it. We need to know who lied to us, who knowingly chose to be loyal to the lie and not loyal to New York City residents and civil servants. They chose to expose more people to toxins, many of whom are now dead because of the lies. The question is, will you get to the bottom of this or continue to support the lie? On September 11th, we lost 343 New York City firefighters. Since then, we have lost 386 more, and we are losing 3 firefighters a month. Their families deserve to know who lied to them. The 1,006 firefighters deserve to know who lied. The 130,000 people enrolled in the World Trade Center healthcare program deserve to know who lied. Last 2 years ago, my father passed away from his 9/11 related cancer. My family wants to know who lied in the weeks and months that followed and said the air was safe. If you are in a position to expose the truth, please do so. But if not, you're working to continue to lie, and it becomes your lie. I implore you, please get us the truth. Do everything we can to get these documents out there. All New Yorkers and Americans deserve to know. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I know you're going to fill out the slip, just so. Okay, and go ahead, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming us here today. My name is Nicholas Pepane. I'm a partner at the law firm of Sullivan, Pepane, Block, McManus, Kafinas, and Canavo. We have had the honor to serve as general counsel to the Uniform Firefighters Association of New York for the past 4 decades. On 9/11, and to this day, our offices are located at 120 Broadway, corner of Broadway and Nassau Street, Lower Manhattan, within stone's throw of the World Trade Center. And we've had our share of victims as well. And I would just like to add to the comments that have been made by everyone this morning. When it comes to saying they can't find records, that is an insult of the highest degree. I say that because, as we all know, there was litigation brought against the city for 9/11 regarding first responders who were not provided with proper respiratory equipment. And that litigation started in 2002. I know it because my firm filed the first lawsuit. And we were there 8 years later as co-liaison counsel for all the claimants, thousands of claimants, when that case settled. And as we know, that settlement was funded, and that litigation was funded not by the monies from the City of New York, but by an insurance company that had been funded by the federal government, up to $1 billion. And in that litigation, the city hired attorneys not only to defend the case, but also to gather, to take possession of, and to inventory 9/11 related documents. We're talking about this being done within a couple of years of 9/11. Perhaps the city should start by asking its attorneys where those documents are today. You've heard the other comments. I don't want to burden this committee with this council with any further comments, but that is the insult of all insults, to say we search for those documents.
Thank you all very much. One question I have is, there is always, everybody's going to sue, but people who have part of health-related are not going to sue because they've already signed. Can you just describe a little bit about who could sue, who can't sue, and what that means? Because that's what I get as a roadblock.
Sure, Chair Brewer.
You got to push the button.
Yes, thank you, Chair Brewer. I'd just like to speak to that in the near term. For the past 13 years, 80,000 people have applied for compensation from the U.S. Department of Justice for their World Trade Center-related illnesses. The Department of Justice has paid out nearly $16 billion to those individuals. The buy-in to participate in that program is a waiver of all liability against the City of New York. There is no liability anymore with the creation of this program, which will run for the next 70 years.
I think it's also important to note that when it comes to the health conditions themselves, so as Andy was saying about the VCF, there are also no issues when it comes to coverage for these conditions. And as we get deeper into new conditions coming forward, the World Trade Center Health Program, also funded through the Department of Justice and Health and Human Services, covers those illnesses. So you have, on one side, you have the compensation side, which people would call pain and suffering and litigation. And on the other side, you have this novel program that covers all of the healthcare aspects of things, which in a personal injury action would lead to, insurance companies being paid back. It's all together. So anything that comes up that's an illness related to 9/11 is going to be covered by this program that's there until 2090.
Go ahead.
And just to add, as far as litigation goes, it's important to note that through federal legislation, which was passed in December of 2001, the city was in essence shielded from any personal liability in terms of financial payments. A $1 billion insurance fund was created and funded by the federal government, limiting the city's liability to that insurance fund, meaning no money is to be paid by the city itself. And that's in addition to the waivers that every victim compensation fund claimant provides when they file a claim with the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund.
Thank you. I kind of knew the answer to the question, but I wanted to get it on the record. So I appreciate all of you. We're going to do everything we can with your assistance. We've been joined by Councilmember Ayala to pass this resolution. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Next, we're going to hear from Ivy Dyson from Brennan, Ben Weisberg from Citizens Union, David Seifert from Surveillance Technology, and Mariana James.
Then after these folks.
Go ahead, whomever would like to begin.
Good morning, Chair Brewer and members of the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. My name is Ivy Dyson. I'm counsel in the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. As part of our focus on government oversight and accountability, we advocated for the creation of an Inspector General for the NYPD in 2014. As you know, the Inspector General's mandate is to provide a systematic review of NYPD policies and practices through thorough investigations and reporting. And over the years, the office has undertaken groundbreaking investigations, leading to real improvements at the police department. But the office has faced significant challenges, such as NYPD's failure to provide information needed for investigations and a lack of consistent leadership. These issues have contributed to variations in the number and quality of the office's investigative reports, its main oversight tool. City Council must pass Intro 1020 to address these problems. The NYPD has on several occasions hindered the Inspector General's work by withholding documents and blocking access to police department employees. Intro 1020 requires that the IG disclose any instances of obstruction or interference by the police. The office has already provided such information in some of its reports, and the bill simply makes this reporting compulsory so that the City Council and civil society groups have the insight necessary to raise concerns and to resolve any issues. Intro 1020 also provides transparency into the conduct of IG investigations that have suffered extraordinary delays by requiring the Inspector General to publish summaries of investigations that have remained open for more than 3 years. This provides a level of transparency already achieved by other inspectors general, both federal and local, while also giving the IG discretion as to the level of detail it discloses. Intro 1020 additionally requires that the office publish a number count of investigations closed without issuing a report within the calendar year, which is another way of tracking its performance. Sharing only the number shields the IG from public pressure to continue investigations that might not warrant a report. And neither provision adds significantly to the Inspector General's existing reporting load. And any added effort is outweighed by the need for City Council and civil society to track the progress of the office's work and to ask questions about any delayed activity. And finally, Intro 1020 ensures that the Inspector General's office has a consistent leader. The office has gone through periods of temporary oversight with no permanent Inspector General at the helm. And Intro 1020 mandates prompt replacement in the case of a vacancy to ensure that the office has the leadership required to navigate relationships with the police and to provide the discretion necessary for more consistent reporting. While we are pleased to see that the quality and consistency of the IG's reporting has improved over the recent years under current leadership, the underlying problems facing the office remain unaddressed through binding legislation. City Council must pass Intro 1020 so that the Inspector General can continue to serve as a strong check on the NYPD. Thank you for your attention.